They need us more than we need them. That was the line. That was the bet. That was the logic that led to the most catastrophic economic decision in modern American history. For decades, there's been a quiet arrogance in Washington. The belief that Canada is like America's attic, a friendly, freezing place where we keep the extra resources until we need them. A 51st state in everything but name. The logic was simple. America holds the cards. America has the consumer market. America has the military. If push came to shove, Canada would fold. Well, this morning, Sunday, January 25th, 2026, we found out what happens when the nice guy finally loses his patience. 48 hours ago, President Trump signed Executive Order 109, imposing a blanket 25% tariff on all Canadian imports: energy, lumber, aluminum, everything. The goal was to force Ottawa to renegotiate the USMCA trade agreement on terms that would basically hand over their sovereignty over their own natural resources. The White House expected a delegation of polite Canadians flying to Washington hand in hand, begging for an exemption. In a move no Wall Street analysts predicted, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, or perhaps his successor, pressured by a unified parliament, didn't just slap tariffs back. He invoked the National Strategic Reserve Act. He didn't tax exports, he banned them. As I'm speaking, the Enbridge pipeline valves are closing. The trains carrying potash to the American Midwest are stopping at the border. Uranium shipments destined for American nuclear plants have been suspended. And the American economy isn't just sneezing, it's having a heart attack. Gas prices in the Midwest jumped 80 cents overnight. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange suspended trading in the wheat market because the fertilizer panic is so severe. And the US Department of Energy just issued a red alert for the Texas power grid. Not because of cold, but because the refineries feeding it are starving. In this video, we're going to expose the lie of energy independence. We'll show why the United States is chemically, geologically, and strategically addicted to Canada. We'll detail the three specific products, heavy oil, uranium, and potash, that are about to bring the world's largest economy to its knees. For you Brazilians to understand the gravity, imagine if Argentina cut all wheat and gas exports to Brazil overnight. That's this level of chaos. This isn't a trade war, this is a siege. And for the first time in history, the United States is on the wrong side of the wall. If you want to understand how we got to this catastrophic point and what comes next, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Leave that like to strengthen this independent analysis. And tell me in the comments, do you think Canada is right to retaliate like this, or are both countries wrong? Let's get to the facts. To understand the panic in the White House right now, you need to understand oil chemistry. We've heard for 10 years that the US is energy independent. We use advanced drilling techniques to extract oil in the Permian Basin in Texas. We pump millions of barrels every day. We export oil to the world. So why does it matter if Canada cuts us off? Here's a dirty secret nobody talks about: the mismatch. The oil coming out of the ground in Texas is called light sweet crude. It's thin as water and low in sulfur. It's good stuff. But here's the problem. The massive refineries on the Gulf Coast, the ones making your diesel, your jet fuel, and your gasoline, weren't built for light sweet crude. They were built in the 90s and 2000s to process heavy sour crude. That's the thick, sludge-like oil that comes from Venezuela, Mexico, and Canada. These refineries are like giant digestive systems. They invested billions of dollars in equipment specifically designed to break down heavy sludge. If you feed these refineries only Texas light oil, they don't work properly. They run at 60% capacity. They can't make enough diesel. They literally malfunction. Over the last 5 years, since sanctions cut off Venezuela and production fell in Mexico, the US refining system had only one lifeline: Canadian oil sands. Canada sends almost 4 million barrels of this heavy oil south every single day. It flows through the Keystone Pipeline, the operational parts, through the main Enbridge line, and by rail. It's the blood in the veins of the American industrial machine. When the president slapped tariffs on Canadian energy, he thought he was taxing a competitor. Actually, he was taxing his own supply chain. But Canada didn't just accept the tax. They played the China card. For years, the US blocked pipelines like Keystone XL because they knew it trapped Canadian oil in the North American market. If Canada can't ship to the coast, they have to sell to the US at a discount. It's called the WCS discount, Western Canadian Select. It saves American drivers billions of dollars a year. But last year, the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline finally opened completely. Canada now has a direct pipe to the Pacific Ocean. Yesterday, the Canadian Energy Minister announced a strategic partnership with CNOOC, China's state oil giant. They've committed to buying every barrel of heavy oil the US rejects. Tankers are already lining up in Vancouver. So what happens to the American Midwest, PADD 2 region? The Midwest depends on Canadian oil for 70% of refinery feedstock. 70%. Without that oil, refineries in Illinois, Ohio, and Minnesota have to shut down. You can't just ship Texas oil up there overnight. There aren't pipelines running north-south in that volume. The infrastructure was built to go north-south or west-east. We're looking at a scenario where gas stations in Chicago, Detroit, and Minneapolis run dry in 72 hours. Not high prices, no gas at all. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is filled mainly with medium sour crude. It can help, but it can't replace 4 million barrels a day of a specific heavy type. And even if it could, the reserve is in the Gulf, not the Midwest. The "we don't need Canada" arrogance ignored the physical reality of the pipeline map. We built a continental energy machine assuming the border didn't exist. Now that the border is a wall, the machine broke. If you think gas lines are bad, wait until you see your electric bill. The United States generates about 20% of electricity with nuclear power. It's the base load. It's what keeps the lights on when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. But here's a terrifying fact. The United States produces almost zero uranium. We import 95% of the fuel for our reactors. Where did we used to get it? Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. But in 2024, Congress banned Russian uranium imports to punish President Putin. That left us with one reliable, secure, massive supplier, Canada. The Athabasca Basin in Saskatchewan is the Saudi Arabia of uranium. The Cigar Lake and McArthur River mines produce the highest grade uranium on Earth. Cameco, the Canadian giant, keeps America's nuclear fleet running. When the trade war started, the White House assumed nuclear fuel would be exempt. It wasn't. In a move that shocked the Pentagon, Ottawa designated uranium as a critical national security asset. They paused all export licenses to the US pending security review. This is checkmate. Nuclear plants run on 18 to 24-month fuel cycles. They don't have years of inventory sitting in the parking lot. Some plants need to refuel this spring. If they don't get fuel elements, they have to shut down. If we lose 20% of grid capacity just as summer approaches, we're looking at rolling blackouts across the entire East Coast. And unlike oil, you can't just buy uranium on the spot market. It has to be mined, milled, converted, enriched, and fabricated. The supply chain takes years. Canada knows this. They know that without the processed uranium, US Navy aircraft carriers don't sail and the lights in Washington, D.C. go out. That's the silent leverage. Canada doesn't brag about their military, but they hold the keys to ours. Energy keeps us moving. Uranium keeps us warm. But this one keeps us alive. Let's talk about potash. It's a pink salt. You probably never thought about it, but if you eat food, you depend on it. Potash is the K in fertilizer, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You can't grow corn, soybeans, or wheat at industrial scales without it. Plants get weak, they don't produce, and the food supply collapses. The world has three main sources of potash: Russia and Belarus, sanctioned, unreliable, hard to transport. Canada, Saskatchewan. Everyone else, tiny amounts. Saskatchewan alone produces almost a third of global supply, but more importantly, it provides 85% of the potash used by American farmers. 85%. We have no plan B. There aren't massive potash mines in Iowa. When Trump slapped the 25% tariff on all Canadian minerals, he effectively put a 25% tax on every bushel of corn grown in America. But Canada didn't just let us pay the tax, they stopped the trains. The Premier of Saskatchewan, acting in coordination with the Prime Minister, cited supply chain instability and stopped rail shipments south. We're weeks from spring planting season. Farmers in the Corn Belt are sitting on tractors staring at empty barns. They need that fertilizer now. If they don't get it in the ground in April, there's no harvest in October. If Canada holds potash north of the border for just 30 days, we miss the planting window. Yields could drop 30 to 40%. You know what that does to food prices? Corn feeds the cows. Soybeans feed the chickens. The price of beef, chicken, milk, eggs, and bread will double. For you Brazilians, imagine if suddenly the price of beans, rice, and meat doubled in 1 month. That's exactly what's happening in the US right now. This is the breakfast tax, and it's entirely self-inflicted. We're already seeing the market react. Analysts are predicting a $15 Big Mac by July if this isn't resolved. Canada, meanwhile, has a bumper crop. They have all the fertilizer they need. They can sell surplus food to the world at record prices while American farmers go bankrupt. The irony is crushing. The tariffs were supposed to save the American farmer from unfair competition. Instead, they're depriving the American farmer of the one thing he needs to compete. For 100 years, the US and Canada were like a married couple. We fight, but we sleep in the same bed. The assumption in Washington was that Canada has nowhere to go. They're stuck with us. They share our culture, they're trapped. That might have been true in 1990. It's not true in 2026. This morning, the Canadian Trade Minister announced an aggressive Pacific opening plan. Ottawa is cutting regulations to fast-track liquefied natural gas terminals on the West Coast. They're accelerating critical mineral exports to Japan, South Korea, and yes, China. The Royal Bank of Canada report calls it an exit strategy from the dependency trap. Canada is realizing that being 70% dependent on the US for trade is a national security risk. They're willing to accept a short-term recession to break that chain. This is the Pentagon's nightmare scenario. We depend on Canada for NORAD. The radar stations that detect Russian missiles over the Arctic sit on Canadian soil. We depend on Canadian aluminum to build our F-35 fighters. Canada supplies 70% of American aluminum imports. We depend on Canadian steel for our tanks. If Canada decides to become neutral in the trade war, if they say we'll trade with everyone equally, suddenly the US defense industrial base has a giant hole. We can't build jets without their metal, can't fly them without their fuel, can't detect incoming missiles without their land. So how does this end? It ends with a phone call. It ends with the President of the United States picking up the phone, calling Ottawa and giving up. Because the math is undeniable. We can hurt Canada, we can crush their GDP, we can cause a recession in Toronto, but Canada can stop our cars, they can kill our crops, they can turn off our lights. The pain tolerance of a resource-rich nation is always higher than the pain tolerance of a consumer-rich nation. Canadians can burn wood to stay warm and eat their own wheat. Americans can't eat iPhones. This trade war exposed the fragility of the American empire. We expanded our influence globally, but forgot to protect our own backyard. We treated our closest ally like a vassal state, and now we're paying the price. As we watch markets open Monday, keep an eye on 3 stocks: Cameco, CCJ for uranium, Nutrien, NTR for potash, Exxon, XOM for refining margins. If those stocks are moving, the crisis is deepening. We'll probably see a temporary exemption announced by the White House in 48 hours. They'll call it a goodwill gesture, but we'll know the truth. They looked at empty gas tanks in the Midwest and realized that in 2026 the map hasn't changed. Geography is destiny, and we are stuck with each other. If this video helped you understand this catastrophic crisis, leave that like that strengthens the channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the situation is evolving fast and you want to be here when the next chapters of this trade war explode. Tell me in the comments, do you think Canada is right to retaliate like this, or are both countries wrong? I want to know your opinion. We'll keep monitoring the situation, and if any major developments happen, you'll be the first to know here. See you in the next video, and remember, Trump bet, Canada called, America lost. Arrogance has a price, and the bill just arrived.